So hi everyone. Let me move you a little closer over here so I could not have to turn my head as far. Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to Editor Data Modeling for GP General Ledger. This should be a fun session today. I will ask Marlene to speak, but I want to thank Marlene and Haley for giving me a platform in which to talk about one of my favorite topics, Power BI, especially when it comes to Dynamics GP. So take it over, Marlene.
Hi, so thank you everyone for joining. We have an honor and a pleasure of working with Belinda, and as if you have joined any previous classes before, it's very hard to not learn from Belinda. Even if you space out a little bit, this is really the best teacher in the industry, and we are very honored to have her join Dexpro for those events.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. So before we get going, forgive me for being lazy with my slide deck here. I do want to point out that next month we're going to be talking about dates, particularly the creation of a date table. And what I'm doing today, I'm pretty much ignoring the date table. I'm starting with a date table already created. So that's going to be pretty beneficial for everyone to understand, because you are more than likely going to want to do time intelligence, meaning month to date, year to date, year over year, and so forth. So understanding the date table is pretty critical, and understanding how you would set it up. Okay, is my audio okay? Rosemary's saying she's having a hard time. You guys can hear me okay, Haley and Marlena? Oh,
I
you're
can hear
muted.
you okay. I'm going to try and send Rosemary our phone dial-in number and see if that helps.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Haley. So I wanted everyone to make sure that they save that on their calendar. And as far as the one after that, I have some ideas, but I do have a survey at the end where I'm asking what you want to see. And General Ledger is always above all what most people are saying, but I really kind of want to, whoever is on the call today, when you fill out the survey at the end as to what you want to see next, then whatever happens to win at that current moment, I think that's what we end up going with. Our agenda today is we're going to stick mostly to the data modeling itself. We'll do just a couple reports at the end because I want to encourage you in some of the direction, but we're going to organize our data. And when you're building a Power BI report to begin with, you do spend most of your time modeling the data. And if you do it right, then you could pass the report building along to many other people in your organization, and they'll likely not have any kind of issues. So we're going to talk about data, in particularly general ledger data. So in the query editor, I'm going to go over what I call Belinda's 3 rules, and we'll be doing that. And then we're going to model chart of account data, and then model transaction data, particularly paying attention to voids, payroll transactions, and how we can handle those to hide some of the information, work, what do we do when we have something unposted, and how do we handle history, particularly beginning balances. And then we'll build a little bit of reports. Now, when you're connecting to data, wow, 5 minutes in, I don't know that I've ever started right away that fast. That's pretty cool. Okay, so when you're connecting to data, for the general ledger particularly, there are 2 different groups that you can go to get access to your SQL Server data. One of them is tables, and one of them are views. Tables, for those of you who may not know this SQL database, these are the actual individual file folders that everything is stored in, where a view is, it's a virtual table actually, and it's where you may combine multiple tables together and give the column names or the field names something a little more user-friendly, and maybe even do some functions in it, maybe some math functions, or maybe converting a date to just be the year or something like that. And when we're talking about the chart of accounts particularly, you're going to typically want, if you're doing anything in the general ledger with your chart of accounts, these are the tables that you want to access. And it's not super user friendly, but it takes all of these to get the information that you would typically need. The first one is the general ledger master table. The second one is the account categories. So, when you create an account in the general ledger, you'd have to define, is it cash, is it AR, and so forth. And you could add to that list, but technically what's stored with the account number is just the index number of the category, like a 1 or a 2, and not the name of the category. So to get the name, you need 102. And then oddly enough, because of the way GP is structured, your chart of accounts can have up to 10 segments, and you could define your segments. Only this index, which is just like a serial number for an account number, appears in this list, not the full account number. So you'll see each segment here, but you won't see the full account number. So, but you can get the description up here at the GL00100. If you want to get the full account number where it looks like 000-1100-00, you have to come in here to this 105 area, right? This table. So rather than accessing all of these, you could also come in and get it directly from the accounts view. And this is a view that was set up and structured very similar to SmartList. So if you go to SmartList and you pull up your chart of accounts and you go into add columns and you add every potential column, that's what you would end up with here. You could also get accounts from the account transaction. I just want to point that out. We'll talk about that more in a moment. Or you could even create your own custom views. Now, if you ask me which one I'm going to prefer, I always think custom views are better, and I'll talk about why that is after I finish talking about the general ledger data. Now, in the general ledger data, if you went to the tables directly, you would have to, oh, and that's not a very good visual right there because I lost one of my little dots there. But if for unposted transaction, you'd have to get it from 2 tables. One is the header information, one is the line item. But for open years, you would get it from a single table, and the history year, you'd get it from a single table. So you'd have to combine all 4 of these together in order to get everything if you went directly to the tables. Whereas if you use the account transaction view or create your own custom view, all of that could be done for you. And so the account transaction view, again, is just like if you go to SmartList and you go to account transactions and you choose to add all the columns, that's what you end up with, account transactions. Now, in that column, you're also going to get a lot of the chart of account detail. So every time a chart of accounts used, you're going to see the chart of account name, you're going to see the category, you're going to see what the typical balance is, debit or credit. So you can see all that information. So what we're going to do is actually on our view today, we're just going to access one place to get all of the information. And the reason why I'm doing it this way is I want to show you one of the features that you could use inside of the query editor. We're going to do something called referencing today. And so that's what we're going to be using. So now that I've gone through all that, I do want to step back for a moment because the custom view option is a very big deal. If you work with Marlene and her team and you get them to build a custom view for you, some of the advantage of that is you're not going to have columns you don't need, and you could also organize it in a much better method. So my preference is always custom if you could get it. Otherwise, try to stick to views that are out of the box. So those are some of the things that I would recommend. So let's go ahead and dig into our demo. Now, here is Power BI Desktop. This is where we're going to be working today. And I do have, and you can see it's got an error message right now because I don't have anything else out there, but I have a calendar table all set up. And once I add in my GP data, my calendar error will disappear. And again, next month, we'll be talking about calendar tables and date tables in a much more specific fashion. I was just saving myself a little bit of time today. Okay. That said, we're going to go and first get our data. So we are going to connect directly to our SQL Server data within Power BI. So what I'm going to do on my home menu, I've got a menu up at the top and each menu has its own custom ribbon. I'm going to open up transform data, which did not open up all the way on that screen. So let me bring it in. There we go. I'm going to open up the query editor. And right now there's nothing in the query editor. Actually, I should have done it that way. Let me close out the query editor. Let me go proper. Let me go to get data. And I'm going to click on the icon. And by clicking on the icon, I'll get the full menu available here. And these are all the different categories that data we can connect to. And we kind of looked at this before. We could get Excel files, we could get actually folders, we can get PDF files, Parquet files, SharePoint files, we could go into the Power Platform and get things. There are a ton of Azure options, a lot of online service options like GitHub and just a bunch out here, QuickBase. And then on the other category, SharePoint list is there too. I go into Microsoft Exchange periodically, but the one I use here the most is the web. I actually will use this for the API. But our data is in GP and our data is in SQL Server. So I'm going to go to the database and I'll select the SQL Server database. And the first thing it's going to ask me is, what is the name of my SQL Server? And the name of my SQL Server is BusyBee. And if you do not know the name of your SQL Server, then Marlene and her team can help you find that. And then I need to tell it which database that I want to access. Now, if you want to cross multiple databases, you could do that. That's perfectly fine. You could have views connecting to multiple databases, but you could also create a single view inside one database that crosses. As long as it's within your same SQL Server, you could do that. But in Power BI itself, if you have multiple SQL servers, we could even do that as well. All right, next I'm going to leave it set to import. By choosing import, it is going to take the data from GP and bring it into my Power BI file. And you always want to try to use import as your option because it's going to be the most efficient. You're going to have the most capabilities out of it. So it's going to be faster. And again, you're going to have more capabilities. There are some use cases for some of the other areas, but we're not going to get into those right now. Oh, and if you do have a question, pop it into the chat. I'm occasionally looking over there. I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. Now it remembers my credentials, so it didn't prompt me for my credentials, but you would enter in your GP credentials. So once you enter in your GP credentials, now I can see all tables, views, and stored procedures in the SQL database that I have access to. So I can see all of them right here. And if I just click on the word accounts, I can see my chart of accounts. That was one of the options we talked about. Another one of the options we talked about was the GL00102. I'm going to select that. This is the one where I explained the account or the account category description, and it had a number next to it. That is that particular one. Here's the account. Here's the one that has the full account number. If I pull over, there it is. So there are a lot of different options here of things that you can get into. But I mentioned to you that we were going to use the one view called account transactions. And this is where all of our transactions are located. And it does have account information. So for example, here is my account category. So I've got the category and I have everything I need right here. So I'm just going to select this particular visual and I'm going to choose transform. And now what it's going to do is open up the query editor on top of my Power BI. And one of the things you should notice, sometimes it opens up behind Power BI. And if it does that, just come to the bottom and you'll be able to find the query editor. And the query editor is going to load up the data. Now it remembers, hey, Belinda, you haven't previewed this data and this data set for 72 days. So if it might have changed, you would need to click refresh, but otherwise you don't need to click on refresh. But now this is the most up-to-date data that I have. Also, if I look in the bottom left corner, I can see I have 121 columns. That is a lot of columns. Remember, I said this is the same as going into Smart List, going to account transactions and adding every column. Now, I cannot see, let me scroll down again to the bottom here. I cannot see all of my data. Actually, I have so many columns that I'm not even seeing all potential 1,000 rows in the preview. Normally, you could preview up to 1,000 rows. If you have more than that, then they just aren't on the page for you at that time. So sometimes you not see all the data, and I'll point out when that's the case. But I have so many columns, so much data that I'm only seeing 199 of my rows. So that's something worth noting. Now, you do not want to build a report with 121 columns of data. That means there's 121 fields for someone to choose from, and that is going to be overwhelming to the report designer. And it's going to be a very frustrating experience. So we don't want that to happen. So let's get into those Belinda's 3 rules I talked about. There are 3 things you should always do when you're changing or when you start modeling your database. And this may be the only 3 things you do, but you definitely want to do them. The first rule is you want to change the name of the query to something that makes sense. Well, I'm going to break that rule this time. You'll see why, because I'm going to reference it in a bit. And then the second rule is, actually, I could just come in and say, rename this account transactions for refresh. Okay, so there, I followed my rule. Okay, I could just change the name over here, or on the query pane on the left, I can right mouse click and choose rename there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the second rule, which is remove any unnecessary columns. Now I'm going to use the same query for my GL account numbers and my transactions. So I want to use columns that are save columns that I need for those 2 queries, and then I'm going to get rid of everything else. So I typically only use this option typically once at the very beginning as part of Belinda's 3 rules. And on the home menu, there's this choose column option that gives you this nice way to select or unselect which columns you want to keep. So I'm going to get rid of most of them. So I'll unselect all and then just pick and choose what I want. And I suggest that you always err on the side of caution. If you think you don't need it, then exclude it. It's far too easy to add. And there's a high probability that I'll miss adding one of them that I meant to add. Well, I want to get the journal entry number. I need that for the transactions and the series and the transaction date and the account number. Actually, I need the account number for both the transactions and the accounts, the chart of account query. Now, account description is next, but when you're pulling it from a query like this is actually pulling it from the data file. And if we've changed the name of our chart of accounts, then we're going to end up with different fields for there. So what I'm going to do is come down and select the account description from the master file. So that will give me whatever's in the general ledger entry card or the general ledger account card, as opposed to what the name of the account was at the time the transaction was entered. I also want the debit and the credit. I want to get that account category, and I'm going to choose account type. Actually, I want to get the account type from the master. I'm also going to get the batch number because remember, I do potentially have unposted transactions that I want to take a look at. I'm going to scroll down a little bit, and I know which ones I typically want to get. So you'll need to be familiar enough with your data that, or have someone with you to know which you need. I'm going to get the description of the transaction. I am going to, let's see, I want the main account segment. I'll talk about why I get that in a moment. I'm going to get the originating document number, master ID, and master name. So if it came from payables or receivables, I'll see that information. And I'm also going to get the originating transaction date or posting date. Where is that? Oh, there it is right there. That is actually the date it was posted. And now I'm going to come in and get the period date. I'll talk about why I'm getting that in a moment. I'll get the posting type. Whoop, I want to get that from the account master. I'm sure I'm going to forget something. reference. I'm going to get the reference, and we'll look at these more in a moment. I'll go ahead and get the source document, and I want to get the user who posted it. And always, always, always in GP, if you're pulling out transactions, get the voided. Do not think to yourself, well, it's not our policy to void transactions in the general ledger. And voided transactions in the general ledger, you can't void posted transactions. You can only void unposted transactions. You're like, oh, we just delete them. Well, at some point, someone might hit the void button. And if they do, that transaction is now recorded in your history. So make sure you always exclude voids. So make sure that we get the voided column so we can exclude voids. And that's another benefit of doing a custom view, is that you could go ahead and exclude the voids. But I always find in working with customers over the year, the more someone insisted that they never use voids, at some point in their data set, somebody accidentally voided or did an experiment. Like, what if I void this? What would it look like? Okay, so I've got quite a few transactions. I'm going to click OK. Now I'm down from 121 columns to 22. So much easier to go through. And then Belinda's final rule, rule number 3, is to set the account type to what it actually should be. So I'm going to zoom in where I can make some changes if I need to. So here's my journal, my general ledger journal entry. It's a whole number, and that's perfectly fine. I could also make it a text if I want to. That would also work. I have my series, which is also a text. And I could see, because it says 1, 2, 3, and this one says ABC. And if I click on the ABC, I could actually see, there it is, text. ABC is text. Also, on the home menu, there is this transform area, and I could see that it's text right here. Now, my transaction date is a date time. All transactions that come from the GP SQL Server will come in as date time. Very few of them record time. As a matter of fact, most of the dates or fields in GP that do track time will actually be a separate field. So what we want to do, and this is a good practice for always BI, if you do track the time, separate it out into a separate column. Do not have a date time column. Have one date column, one time column. I'm going to change this to be a date only, since we're not using the time. So I'll click right here on the date time, and I can tell it's date time because, well, one, I see the time, but also because I can see a clock on top of the calendar. So I'm just going to change that to a date, and you notice how that changes. I have account number, I have which is text. That's fine. We want that to stay text. I have debit and credit amounts. Those are decimal numbers. That's fine. Account category number. Well, that's actually not the number. The view brought it in as account category. So I'm going to just double click on the column and rename that by getting rid of the word number. Now I have account description, and I'm just going to call this, actually, I'll just go ahead and call it account description. Okay, and now let's see if I can get over. Let me scroll up. Oh, it's a little annoying sometimes playing with the, there we go. Alt-8, there we go. I'm just going to do this this way now that you've seen me do a couple. Okay, we have the posting type from account master. I'm going to just change that to a posting type. It's text, it's fine. I have the batch number in case it's unposted. That's text, that's fine. I have the description of the journal entry. I'm actually going to rename this to JE description. It's text, that's great. My main account segment, right now it's set to text. So I'm probably going to want to alter that, maybe, maybe not. If you're using letters, alpha fields in your chart of accounts, you'll definitely always need to keep it as a text. If you have leading zeros, you also want to keep it as a text. So we'll talk about that more in a moment. I have the originating document number, And I'm going to rename this to subledger document number, because this again is something that if it came from, there you go, copy that, and it's text. If it came from payables or receivables, then that would be the transaction number from there. Like you can see payment number and invoice number, so forth. Then I have originating master ID, same thing. I'll put in subledger master ID, and originating master name. That is the vendor name, customer name, and employee information is also included here. We're going to talk about how to summarize that shortly because we don't necessarily want everyone to see things. Here's our actual day posted. So I'm going to just rename this to actual day posted. And I'm going to change this to be a date field. We're going to come back and revisit this in a moment. Period ID, that's actually a whole number, but decimal's okay if you want to leave it there because we're going to just use it and then remove it. Then we have our posting type, and this is the question of, is this a balance sheet or a profit and loss account? And the real question that GP is asking us on that is, when we close out to retained earnings, do we want this to roll forward or do we want it to close out to retained earnings? So how do we handle our end of the year number? Then we have the journal entry reference. So I'm going to make that JE reference. And in my slide deck, I'll talk about which one of these comes from the description field in a transaction and which one comes from the distribution reference. Then we have our source document, the user who posted it, it's just their ID here, and then our voided column. So we have sufficiently worked on our data set here. Now, before I move on and start modeling specifically for our chart of accounts, I want to go ahead and organize some where my files are going to be, where my queries are going to be. Right now, there's just the one query. But what we're going to do is create a schema or a model for our data. We're going to have a data table, which is often in the world of Power BI called a fact table. And this is where all the transactions will lie. And we'll just do one as a reference of this. So over in the query pane, I'm going to right mouse click and choose new group. And I'm going to create a group called, you could either make it look data or fact table. I use fact, so I'll create a group for all of my fact tables. There's a little folder. I'm going to create another group for the lookup tables. This will be my chart of accounts. And in the world of Power BI, they're often called a dim table for a dimension table. And then I'm going to have one more. I'm going to have a group where I have queries that are only used for the purpose of refreshing. So I'm going to create one more group here. And I'm going to make this group name or folder name called use for refresh only. Okay, so now I have my three queries. It automatically, or my three folders, it automatically created the folder other queries, which will stay out here now once I created the first one. And this is only going to be used for refreshing. So I'm going to take this query and I'm just going to drag it in on top of that used for refreshing. So it is now located here. So now I have, when I'm in here, it'll be easier for me to work and figure out which table is which while I'm working. So that's what this is for. We're just for the query editor. So let's go ahead now, and we're going to create our account table, our chart of accounts table, or our chart of accounts query. Now, I'm not going to go back and connect to data again because this represents all the data. And nor do I want to have one big flat table and just use this. A lot of people would be tempted just to use what I have on the screen, but you don't want to do that. Your data is not going to model efficiently, and your data size is going to be larger than it needs to be. So what we're going to do is, for this query, I'm just going to, over on the left, right mouse click and choose the option reference. Notice I could duplicate it as well, but I'm going to choose reference. And now I have this same query with a 2 at the end. Let me come in Belinda's rule number 1. And I'm going to rename this to accounts. And now I will drag this to my dimension tables. Now the dimension tables or lookup tables are ways you would filter the fact table. So we would look at a particular account number or a particular account category. These were the things that we would look up. And notice here, the source of this one is actually this particular query. If I came in and I looked at the source here, so let me see if I can go back to a live option here. My source here is my SQL Server database. The server name is BusyBee and the database is 2. And then I navigate directly to this particular query, account transactions. Whereas this one, my source, if I were to look at source, that's the only option here. This is actually the query that I have down here. If I came down here and I rename this query, there it is, to account transactions for refresh, and I came back up here, now you're going to notice that it picked up that change. It had put the space in between. So I am only making one call to my data, only one call to SQL Server to get everything in this view, but I'm actually able to create this separate one for just tables. Now, I don't need all 20, or for accounts, I don't need all 22 rows here. So what I'm going to do is come up to this choose column again. And I always do choose column cautiously the second time I use it, because if you go back in and add something and then you've done this choose column again, you would have to, every time you do the choose column this way, you'd have to add it. And I'll show you why that is. So again, I'm not going to keep as many, I'm going to get rid of more than I'm going to keep. So I just want the account number, the account category. Notice now it already has these newer names that I've modified. The account description, the account type, the main account segment, and the posting type. And that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now I'm down to just 6 columns. Now, if I had connected directly to the accounts table, then I would only have one row for every account number that is in that master table that's in GP. Now what I'm looking at is all of the account numbers that have been used that have transactions on them. I'm not looking at every one. But also, you can say I got cash here a lot. I am pulling this for every line of the transaction. So I have a lot of duplicates out there. So the next thing I need to do is get rid of my duplicates. So I only have one row for each account number. Now there are a couple ways I could do this. I could highlight all the columns by clicking on the first one, holding the shift key down and selecting them all, coming up to remove, and then telling it to remove duplicates. That's one way I could do it. The other way I could do it would be, and I probably could just do it right here on account number and remove duplicates as well. But instead, I'm going to come up here and click on this little table icon at the top, in the top left. And then I'm going to come down and choose remove duplicates. There it is. And now each account number will only appear one time. And I have the account number, the account category, the account description, the account type, the main record, and the posting type. Now, something I want to point out about the account description is, and here is a perfect example, row 85 right here. This is actually a unit account. I can see that from the account type. The unit accounts will be the only accounts in the GP general ledger that do not have an account category. So instead of keeping this category, what I could do would be come into account category here, and I could replace a blank with unit account if I wanted to. That's something I could do. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to highlight this whole column, right mouse click, and choose replace values. And I'm going to leave, just don't type anything in there for the blank, and I'll replace it with unit account. And then I'll click OK. And now you're going to see what that was, row 85, I think. unit account populated. Now I have it in both places. Now there are also allocation accounts in GP, but we won't see any of those here by pulling it from the account transactions, because you cannot post to an allocation account. You post to the underlying accounts that make up the distribution of those allocation accounts. So we're not going to see any other type of account here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and go ahead and just right mouse click and remove this column. Now, I told you I would show you about changing the columns. I'm going to come back up to the step, remove other columns. And you're going to notice that I like to work with my M code, the formula bar shown, so I could see what I'm doing. And in this particular mode, when I am on remove other columns, I'm basically telling it which columns to keep. So if I were to go back in and add a column that would appear in here, it's not going to automatically be checked. But if I check it again, actually, let me just show it to you. I think it'll make more sense then. Okay, instead of removing the column the way I did, I'm going to come up and choose columns again. And now I only see the columns available, and I'm going to get rid of account type. Now, let's say that I realize, oh, dang, I wish I would have added another column. I'm going to come up and select a column up here and maybe choose voided. That wouldn't make sense, but I'll click OK. And when I come to the bottom, I still don't see the voided column. And the reason for that is I did the remove other column again, and I would have to come in each time and select that. So that's one of the things you want to keep in mind. Let me come back up here and get rid of that void option. Sorry, there we go. I was trying to turn my phone off and I took pictures of the call. Okay, let me get the voids back and then come back to the very end. I don't want to do it that way. I'm going to right mouse click and remove. All right. Now I could use this main category now to help even create more account numbers for myself here. So, or more categories. So I have, whether it's a profit and loss or balance sheet, and that could be beneficial. And I have my account category, but maybe I want to know if it's an asset or a liability or so forth. And one of the ways I could do that would be using the main account number, because I know if it starts with a 1, it must be an asset and so forth. So what I'm going to do is come up and click on add column, and I am going to add a conditional column. So I'll click on conditional column, and on this column name, I'm going to call this account type. And now I'll come in and say, all right, first I want to deal with the unit accounts, because the unit accounts could have any kind of account number. So I'm going to first come in and say, hey, I'm going to look at the account category. And because that's text, I have text options here. So the text option I want does not contain the word unit. So if unit is in the account category name, then I want this to be called unit accounts. Now I'm going to come in and add an additional clause and start using the main segment. So I'm going to come in and say the main segment, and you'll notice that it's not showing up as numbers. Now, if I change this to a whole number, I could say less than 2,000 and do it that way. But instead, I'm going to come in and just say that it begins with a 1, because I have it set to text. And this would be an asset. And of course, if your accounts have a lot more granularity, you're going to want to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do another add here. I'm going to do main account segment again. I'm going to say begins with a 2, and this will be liabilities and equity. And then I'm going to come in and say, if it begins with, actually, I should have just said liabilities. Why not? If it begins with a 3, you know what? We'll just copy and paste, make those the same thing. Okay, so if it begins with a 2 or 3, it's liability and equity. Main segment, if it begins, Now this is where it gets a little sticky, right? Because if it begins with a 4 to 4, 4, 1, 4, 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, it's sales. If it's 4, 5 on up, it's cost of goods sold. So I'm going to do something a little weird. I'm going to take a shortcut here. Normally I wouldn't do this. I'm going to just go in and say begins with a, oh, actually I can't do it. Let's just say 4 or 5. We'll call this sales, and I'll quickly populate these. It won't take that long. So I'm just going to come in and cover all my bases and add one more clause here, main segment. And it would have been a lot easier if I'd have turned it into a number, but begins with 4, 2. This will be sales. I only have 2 more of these to do. So I'll do main segment begins, where's begin with? Up there it is. Begins with 4, 3. It's sales. One more, add clause. And then we'll have sales done. Begins with 4, 4. It's sales. Now, what's kind of interesting here is if it's it starts with 4, 5, 4, 6, 4, 7, 4, 8, 4, 9, it's cost of goods sold. But because I'm doing this in the proper order, I could just come in and say begins with a 4. Because already if it begins with a 4, 0, 4, 1, 4, 2, 4, 3, 4, 4, I've already excluded those. Then this would be cost of goods sold. And then if it's anything else, we'll just call it expenses. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. And looks like I made a boo-boo. So let me pull this up. Oh, I wrote does not contain unit. I meant for that to be contains unit. There we go. Now we have this broken down, and I'm going to set this data type to a text. So I have all of my account numbers organized. I'm going to come back down to this refresh thing that we have going on here. I do not want to remove any of the columns that are being used for accounts, because if I did, it would break the accounts visual. And I'm going to break one, and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to just remove my account category. And if I come into accounts now, it's broken. And it's broken because I'm doing a lot of things with the account category and it doesn't exist. That is just referencing this table. So when I put it back, you could see I get my accounts back. So this time I'm going to do another reference, and this one is going to be for all of my account transactions except payroll. So I'm going to start by getting all my account transactions. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is come in here and I'm going to exclude my voids. So I'm going to come to voided here, and notice again, I'm down to seeing 1,000 rows. So, but I still don't see any yes voids. I could load more and I may or may not see yes that are voids. So what I'm going to have to do here is choose the text filter and choose equals no. And I could choose the drop down list here. Sometimes you're not going to see all of your values. So you want to keep that in mind because you're only looking at the first 1,000 rows. Now I'm going to click OK. I've excluded my voids. Now I can remove this void column because I'm not going to use it in my account transaction query, nor did I use it in the accounts query. And now that I have that done, I can go ahead and start working on some of this data. So what I'm going to do is come over here, right mouse click, and do another reference. And this one, we're just going to call account transactions. And now I'm going to move this up to my fact table area. The fact table is where all the data is going to be. It's going to be the one that grows and grows, and it's the things that we measure. So now I have my account transaction table here, and I'm going to do some cleanup. Again, I'm going to come into home. I'm going to go to choose columns, and I'm going to get rid of all of the columns that I used, with the exception of the account number in the account transaction, because I need the account number so I can create a relationship, but I don't need the other columns. So I'll keep account number, but I'm going to get rid of category, description, account type, main segment, and I thought there was one more, posting type. So I'm going to get rid of all those, and I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. So now I'm down to 16 columns for this particular query. So let's spend some time looking at this query. So first of all, one important thing on dates, even though we're going to be talking more about dates next month, we have our transaction date listed right here. But I also want to point out that we have this actual date posted. And for the unposted transactions, it's putting in a date of 1/1/1900. And that's a common date inside of the land of GP. So, right, you've seen that a lot pull up in like smart lists, particularly. If the date's null or empty, then the way GP's written, it populates it with 1/1/1900. So we know that's basically a null value. And if I scroll over, I should see, oh, I didn't get the status. Look at that. So let me go back in and get the status, the document status. So I'm going to come back to this refresh area over here, go to remove other columns. Let me get the document status. So I'll just do a search. Told you I'd forget something. I'm going to add the document status and then come down to the bottom, and then I'm going to quickly check the data type for it. It's text. That's good. You can see the work there. Now, when I come back up to my account transactions, I'm not going to see it because I need to come here and click in this box in order to add it now. So I'm going to come in and add my document status. That's that caution I was telling you about. All right, so here is my document status. So those work transactions, well, they haven't actually been posted yet. So because there's no posting date, it goes to 1/1/1900. And what I'd like you to get in the habit anytime you see dates is go ahead and change the date so it doesn't display as 1/1/1900. Instead, it displays as null. And I'm doing that because I'm creating a date table based off of these dates. And I do not want my date table to start at 1/1/1900. I don't want to see every year from 1900 to 2021. So to replace this, we could do that right mouse click and replace value like I did earlier. Technically, the way to get to it would be to go to transform, and then under format, you could choose, it's under format, right? Where is it? Oh, here it is right here. Replace values. I was thinking of trim. And we would want to replace 1/1/1900 with null and then click OK. And now we have null there for those particular fields. So all of our dates are actual dates. They're not those fake null dates. Now, let's keep talking about dates for a moment. Let's talk about beginning balance dates. I'm going to come in. We all know in the land of GP, beginning balances are period 0. So temporarily, I'm going to come in and just do a filter on period 0. And let's take a look at these transaction dates. So you can see 12/31/2024. This is actually the beginning balance for January 1st, 2025. So when we close out our entries, it puts them in, if I had left the fiscal year out there, you would have seen it was the fiscal year 2025 that this belongs to, but the date's actually in 2024. So we want to make sure that we can add a date to this so that when we use beginning balances, if we use them, that they are appearing in the right date. So the beginning balance, we're going to make that 1/1/2025. So first thing I'm going to do is come in and get rid of that filter where I was just looking at 0 balances. Okay, so now I can see all of my periods again. So what we're going to do is highlight the date column. And to get that date right, I'm going to add a new column that is this date plus 1. And this is where we actually have to write some M code. We can't necessarily use anything up at the top. Wish we could, but we can't. I mean, I suppose one way we could do it would be to change this back to a date time. And then we could come into the time area and add in a day. Where is that? Oh, I'm not going to do it that way. There is a way you could do it, but we're not going to do that. So forgive me for even making that connection for you. Pretend I never said that. We're going to actually write M for mashup language code, where we can add this. And don't freak out when I say we're writing code, because it's a very much the same kind of concept of doing something in Excel. It's just a slightly different language. And there are only a few times that you need to write a code like this. So I'm going to go up to add column, and I'm going to choose custom column. And I'm going to we'll just call this BBF date for the balance brought forward date. So I'm going to take the date in this transaction column and add one day to it. So as I start typing add, I could see I get IntelliSense popping me up, guiding me. Well, I want to add a day to a particular date. And this is case sensitive, so select from the list. So it's a date function dot, I'm going to add days. So I'll put in a start parentheses, and now IntelliSense takes over again. Let me zoom in. So it tells me to select my date time. So I want to add a date to the transaction date. So I'll just double click on it. I could have also selected it and then clicked on insert. Now it tells me to put a comma. So I'll put a comma, space, and now I can tell it how many days I want. So I'm just going to come in and add one day and then put an ending parentheses and then click OK. And now when I get it back, oh, no, don't tell me that every now and then I get my Zoom it going nuts. Okay, I'll try to get my Zoom it back. But now I have my balance brought forward date, which is one date after. And so I'm going to change this to a date format. And let me see if I could get my Zoom it back. And it is, oh, yeah, okay. There we go. Okay, so I got my balance brought forward date. So that starts as 2, 3, and then this one over here is 2, 2. So it's definitely going to work for me. So if I came back in and changed my periods to just show me 0, we're going to see that the dates 12/31/2024 in this column are 1/1/2025. So now I just need to do a formula that picks which date is correct for that row. So I'm going to look at the period ID, and if it's period 0, I'll get the BBF date. Otherwise, I'll get the other date. So under add column, I'll do another conditional column, and I'm going to call this transaction date, or actually, let me call it GL date. That's the terminology we're used to. And I'll come in and say, if the period ID, and I'm going to do does not equal 0, because this is the first thing that calculates, and there are many more that do not have 0 than have 0. So if it does not equal 0, then I'm going to click on this drop-down list, select a column, and get the date from the transaction date. Otherwise, if it is 0, I'm going to change this to select column. It'll be the BBF date. And now I'll click OK. Now I have a GL date column. So I'm going to set the data type here to date time. Now I'll select BBF. Set up the way I want. Then the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more conditional statement that indicates whether or not this is a beginning balance. And so I will come in back under add column conditional, and then I'll choose beginning balance. And if this is period 0, actually I'll say is not period 0, because that way it'll go faster. The answer is no, it's not a beginning balance. And if it is period 0, the answer is yes, it is a beginning balance. And I will make that text. And now I'll get rid of my period ID. Now that I've got that done, I'm almost there, and we're almost out of time, but I'm going to come back down here. I have all of my transactions. I have everything modeled nice and neat. What I want to do now is hide my payroll transactions. So what I'm going to do is click on the drop-down list, and notice I don't see payroll here. If I click load more, I should be able to get it. Otherwise, I could do text filters. And I'm going to just check first by clicking on payroll. So I have that set right. And then I'm going to click on this gear and then come back and change this to does not equal. Normally I type it in and I want to make sure I've spelled everything correctly. So this is all of my transactions with the exception of payroll transactions. Now what I'm going to do is take this account transactions, right mouse click, and I'm going to choose duplicate this time. And now it's duplicated all the steps, and I'm going to drag this one down to refresh only. And I'll get rid of the 2 and we'll call this one payroll. And I'm going to change this filter just like I did before to only be payroll. So I'll say equals payroll. And so now I have my payroll transactions. And I want to summarize these because I do not want anyone to see individual people and their paychecks. So what I'm going to do now, there are 17 columns. I'm not going to use all of these, but I'm going to come up to transform because I want to transform this query. And the very first option is group by. And this is a way for me to aggregate or coalesce or combine, collapse rows up. So I'm going to choose advanced because I'm going to create multiple. I want more than 2 columns. So I don't want it to summarize by journal entry. Instead, I'll go ahead and keep the series. So I'll do it for payroll, which would be all of them because they're all payroll. I'm going to then add a group and then summarize by account number. Next up is debit and credit. So I'll come in and say debit amount is my column name. And I want it to sum up the debit amount. I'll add another aggregation, and this one will be credit amount. And notice I'm taking care to use the same column names. I'll summarize this and make this one credit amount. Now I can keep adding up here. I'm going to also summarize by what? Maybe document status. I want to see if it's open, work, or history. I'll click on add again and look to see if there's anything else that I want to add. I don't want to, doesn't really look like it. I could add in the source document and then I would be able to see what, like if it was a payables check or a return. I'm not going to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is just bring in the beginning balance. None of the payroll accounts should have beginning balance unless it's like the payables, accounts payables, taxes payable, and so forth. So I'm going to put in the beginning balance as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And now I'm down to 6 columns and I have just those pieces of information. Now I'm going to come back up to transactions because I also want to get the journal entry reference column name. So I'm just going to double click up there and copy that, come back into the payroll, and I'm going to add a new column, add a custom column. The name of it will be journal entry reference. And then down below in double quotes, I'll enter in payroll transactions. And actually, maybe I'll call it payroll summarized. And the fact that it is in double quotes indicates that it's just text. So you'll see I have this column here and I will come in here and, oh, I didn't add in the date. I need to add in the date and then text. So let me come back up to the group and I'm going to add a grouping option and add in the date. So there's the GL date, click OK. All right, so now I have all of my columns for payroll. Now I'm going to come back up to transactions and I want to merge those in. So under transform, under home, I'm going to come in and I said merge, but technically what I'm going to do is append. So everywhere where the column name is the same, it'll just add to it. So I'll click on append. And now I'll select that payroll transaction and click OK. And now if I were to click in here, I would be able to see I have payroll transactions back. And they're actually just summarized transactions. And now for the final step here, for these 2 queries, I'm going to just right mouse click on them and uncheck enable load. And then that way, these two queries will not be part of my data model as far as what to choose from. We're only going to see account, transaction, and accounts. And I'm going to go ahead and click on OK. And when I do that, they'll come in. Notice only those two are coming in. The others are being used for refresh purposes, but they're not being loaded into my data model. And then when I come into relationships, the relationship is set between the account transactions and the account number by account number. So that's right. And actually what I'm going to do here is just click on that little eyeballs to hide it from view here, because that I don't need to have it listed twice. And then I'm going to take the date here and connect this to the transaction date. If I could find the transaction date. Oh, GL date, that's what we called it. And now I'm going to hide the GL date. And now I have everything all linked together. And so I could literally create visualizations that is going to show me valuable data sets. So like right here, and we're not going to have time to get into, oh, I put in does not equal unit accounts already, but let me clear that out. I'm going to come in, and for this visual, I'm going to just maybe do sales. So let me open this up, open up my accounts. The account type, I'll put in a filter for this page, and I will choose sales. And then now in my account transactions, I'm going to, actually I would need to do debit and a credit, but I'm just going to put in credit and debit for the values right now. And then, so I could see my sales. And then I'm going to come in and say, all right, I want to also see these by month. So I'll put that in the access. And actually, you know what? I'm also going to come in and put the year in the above the access, and then maybe even the quarter. So now while I'm looking at my sales for each month, I can see the debit and a credit amount. If I were to drill down, I could then, let me do it this way. If I look on 2024, I'm now looking at all the quarters in 2024. I can look at Q1 and I can see all the months in Q1. Remember, this is Fabricam, so there's not a lot of data here. If I select 2021, Q1, I can see the 3 months for Q1. Let me go into Q2. There's April, May, and June. And then I could even get more information for April. But now I have a lot of valuable ways I can analyze my data. I could use all kinds of information, including looking at something like the user who posted it. And one of the things I could also do here is I'm going to make this a stacked column chart and then put in the account number in the legend. So account number in the legend. Oh, that was a small multiple, but actually that's cool. If you turn it on in preview, and I have it on here, you could do a small multiple to see the transactions by individual account numbers. And I accidentally clicked on Q&A. So if I were to look at just Q, let me double click on April here. Actually, let me go up because I think I'm looking at April. Notice I'm seeing each account number. I could even put the account description there with it. And now I can see the account number in the description, which is something that I love. So while I'm looking at this, I could see for each of these, I see my years. So if I select 2026, I could see the account numbers, and there may be more. Nope, these are the only 4. And I'm seeing all of this by year transaction. So this is a lot, but this is basically the modeling of the general ledger data. And the slide deck talks about where and how I did some of these things that we just did. I did want to point out that when you're keying in a transaction, this reference line is called description, and it comes over as the reference information in the GP data, and the distribution reference comes over as a description. And so I do have, I know a lot of people have to leave. I'm sorry that I ran so long. I just get excited and have a lot I want to show. Here's some of the contact information if you want the slide deck for afterwards. And this link also provides you with the ability to tell me what you want to see next time. So Marlena, sorry I ran over.
I'm sure nobody minds learning from you longer, I'm sure. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, my pleasure. And with what I did today, you could take and do basically anything you want with your general ledger data now. It is, if you think about a general ledger as the bucket that catches everything. So it's a wealth of information. And one of the things that I've done is I've protected your payroll information. You might even want to just flat out exclude payroll anyhow and just leave the rest of the information in there. That's certainly an option as well. Okay. I am actually finally done now.
Well, I just wanted to add, anyone who is not currently our client, that outside of the training with Belinda, we offer free as well as, hands-on training classes with Amber Bell. So please check our website. And also for new upcoming clients, we offer high-level system evaluation at no charge, where we can tell you what parts of the system you own and are not using today. So please feel free to contact us for further assistance.
Yay. So next month should be a lot of fun. So make sure you put it on your calendar and you sign up. Thanks, everyone.